Before you can get through to someone about the Lord Jesus Christ, the first step is, well, do they trust you? Do you seem like a nice, happy, inviting sort of person? If not, they're not going to listen to you, even if you got the best arguments in the world, you know?
Welcome back to the Word on Fire show. I'm Brandon Vogt, the host and the senior publishing director at Word on Fire. The Catholic Church in many parts of the Western world is shrinking. Parishes are closing or being merged. Dioceses are devising strategies of consolidation. But for the church to flourish, we need not just strategies for consolidation, but strategies for growth. How do we grow our parishes and dioceses? That's what we'll be discussing today with one of the church's greatest evangelists, Bishop Robert Barron. Bishop, good to be with you.
Hey, Brandon. Always good to see you. Good to talk to you.
You've had a few months now to settle into your new diocese of Winona, Rochester. Give us an update on how things are going there. Have you settled down into your routines and your tasks? How's it going?
Yeah, it's going well. I'm kind of shuttling back and forth between Rochester and Winona. So the headquarters are in Winona. A lot of things happen in Rochester and environs. So I'm kind of going back and forth a lot. Confirmation season, we have a fall edition of it and a spring edition. So the fall edition is almost over. So I've been going all over the diocese. We had a great day, a place I never heard of before I came out here called Lake Okoboji, which is in northern Iowa. And it's like a kind of a resort area. And the priests every year gather there for a few days of like reflection and prayer. So I was with them. And, you know, I'm settling into it, enjoying it. Right after we record these words, I've got a finance council meeting. So all the things that bishops have to do. But no, I'm enjoying it.
Well, speaking of your diocese, you recently met with all the deans of your diocese. So these are priests that are in charge of the regions of your diocese to discuss a number of issues, including the merging and clustering of parishes. This is a conversation being had in many dioceses around the country. And you said that even as you expressed your approval for some of these changes, you told the deans that for every strategy of consolidation, I want a strategy for growth as well. Why did you say that? What inspired that?
Because of Jesus. He says, go and preach to all nations. He didn't say preach to your culture, preach to your country, preach to like-minded people. He said, preach to everybody. Catholicism is a universal religion. It's meant to go out to the whole world. And so I don't think treading water or maintaining the status quo or just managing decline is at all what Jesus wants or expects of us. So as a leader of the church here, I just feel it's incumbent upon me to keep reminding people of that. You know, and again, I get it as a provisional strategy, and a lot of dioceses have to do it for, you know, economic reasons, because of demographic changes, because of the paucity of priests or whatever. You have to do some of this consolidating and reconfiguring. I get it, but at the same time, I don't want to acquiesce to that. I don't want to accept that as the new normal, the new status quo. The church is always on mission. It's permanently on mission. And the mission is to convert the whole world to Christ. So, you know, I want to increase the size of my diocese. I want to increase the number of priests. I'm not interested in, you know, let's make do with the little that we have. That kind of defeatist attitude, I think, is problematic in the church today.
Now, you offered to your deans 4 strategies for growing the church, 4 strategies for increasing the number of Catholics in your diocese. And I want to spend time on each one of those. But before we get to the particular strategies, I wanted to ask you about this whole language in general of ideas or strategies or plans. I know some people in the church get a little nervous about that sort of language. They stop and criticize it as being too secular, too corporate. How would you respond to that sort of objection to this strategic language?
Well, no, I don't get that at all. I mean, we're just trying to think it through in a creative and intelligent and responsible way. And so, of course, the church should strategize. The church did that from the beginning. Look at Peter and Paul. You know, okay, you go to the Jews, I'll go to the Gentiles, and you know, let's get together in Jerusalem and make sure we're on the same page. And so the church has been organizing itself and strategizing and planning from the beginning. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, if the corporate thing, if you fall into that mentality completely, or you forget the evangelical purpose, But if you bring all of the strategic element under the aegis of the evangelical command, I got no problem with that. On the contrary, look too in the New Testament, they are interested in numbers. We can fall in the trap. Oh well, as long as I'm doing the best I can, I won't worry about numbers. No, but read the New Testament. That day, 3,000 were added, and that they were interested in the number of people because Jesus said, "Preach to all nations." So I have no problem with that. I think we should be counting. I think we should say, look, how many active Catholics do we have? And whatever the number is, we should be unhappy with it. You know what I'm saying? Unless and until everyone is worshiping the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, then we've not done our job. We've not done our missionary work. So we should be permanently unhappy with whatever number we come up with, but we should be watching that they're at least trending in the right direction.
As a pet peeve of mine, I've been involved with parishes and ministry circles for many years, and you'll often put on a big event and you're hopeful that 100, 200, 300 people will come and 5 people come. And then afterward, people will say, well, as long as we affected one person, it was worth it. And there's something true about that, of course.
Right about that.
But I also see it as a justification for mediocrity and failure in many cases. Would you agree?
Quite right, yeah. And sure, we should be able to say, no, that was a flop. That failed. We got to do something better next time. Something was wrong here. But yeah, we church people, we tend to be kind of nice guys. We don't want to hurt people's feelings. And if something was planned carefully and it didn't go well, we don't want people to feel bad about it. But we also got to be, I think, clear-eyed about our work. And okay, look, that didn't work. Whatever that strategy was, it was not successful. Let's try something else. That's, I think, that's healthy in the life of the church.
Okay, well, let's get to these 4 strategies that you propose as ways to grow the church. Here's the first one. You said every family that comes regularly to Mass should make it their evangelical responsibility to bring another family to Mass this coming year. Say more about that.
Yeah, Brandon, I've often said that the teaching of Vatican II is still largely unrealized. And part of that, the universal call to holiness, essential to which is the evangelical mission, that every single person, not just priests and bishops and religious, but every baptized person is priest, prophet, and king. As prophet, you're meant to announce the truth. As priest, you're meant to sanctify. As king, you're meant to lead people in the direction of the kingdom of God. All of that means you got to be an evangelizer. So it's not enough for a Catholic to say, well, I went to Mass and I commune with the Lord and received the Blessed Sacrament. That's great and that's indispensable, but that's not enough. What are the last words of the Mass? Go. The Mass is ended. Go. Glorify the Lord by your life. Go announce the good news. Everyone that comes to Mass should see himself or herself as an evangelizer. And first step, before we get to evangelizing people overseas or evangelizing those who never heard of Christ, how about evangelizing those within our own community who've fallen away? You know who they are. Every single Catholic I talk to on Sunday, you know somebody who should be coming to Mass and isn't. Go get them. Go get them. It's your responsibility. Oh no, well, Father should do that. Well, no, but Father, doesn't know them that well, wouldn't know how to reach them, maybe wouldn't know how to answer the particular questions they have. If you want Father's help, terrific. Reach out for it and bring him into the picture. But you do it. You go do it. So as I say, if every single family that comes to Mass on Sunday were to say, okay, by this time next year, I want a family accompanying me. Now, it could be your own children. It could be your parents. It could be somebody at work. It could be a friend of yours. I don't care. Identify one person or family and say, my job is to bring them back to church. Hard? Yeah. I don't see any place though in the New Testament where it says this is going to be easy. The Lord's, I'm going to give you an easy job, everybody. So it's always been a hard job, but I think it's incumbent upon every baptized person to do it.
Back when that famous Pew Study came out in 2014, I think it was, where it had that indicting statistic that for every one person who comes into the Catholic Church, 6.45 leave. I had a couple friends of mine, we were talking about that statistic, and one of my friends said, you know what, I'm going to make a commitment now that every single year I'm going to be standing up in front of the church at the Easter Vigil because I'm sponsoring one person coming into the church. They said, that's my goal. Every year I want to bring one new person into the church. And they've done it every single year now. They've been a sponsor. And I've always thought that was a beautiful commitment to say, look, just one. I might not be able to evangelize 50 or 100 or 200, but can I bring one new person into the church or back to the church?
Absolutely. That's really good, too. I like how specific that is and how liturgical it is and tied to the church's sacramental order. That's terrific.
Let's turn to strategy number 2. You recommend that every Catholic should pray for the expansion of the church. Why is that?
Nothing in the Bible of any moment ever happens without prayer. It just is a basic rule of the spiritual life that it's not up to us. It's up to our being connected to the power and energy of God. And that's the way I'd put it. God delights in our cooperation. He wants us involved. But that can happen if and only if we're connected to God and His power. If I say, okay, on my own, with my own ideas and strategies, I'm going to do this, it'll never work. It's when I'm connected to God in a lively and conscious way. And now, with that inspiration, I do my work. That's when we tend to be effective. I mentioned before, Brandon, the great Billy Graham, the second greatest evangelist of the last century, always sent, before he did a crusade in a major city, he sent a year in advance a team whose whole purpose was to pray. They weren't doing organization or strategizing or calling people. Their whole purpose was to pray for the success of the crusade. I've always thought that's dead right, that whatever we do, that there are some people who have the task of praying. And I think now, in parish life, how many elderly people or shut-in people or people that feel, what can I do to help the church? Well, that's what you can do. You can do it massively, is you can pray. And I would say for this, that this parish increase in size by 100%. How about that? That we pray that we double the size of our parish in the coming year. Ask the Lord. He says, beg the harvest master for workers to go in the vineyard. So that's another thing, pray for priests. But just pray for that people in your parish would increase, the number of parishioners would increase. Within the economy of salvation, within the physics of the spiritual life, nothing great ever happens apart from prayer, period.
I have to ask you this because I know it's going to be a pebble in the shoe for listeners. You said Billy Graham was the second greatest evangelist of the last century. Who's the first in your mind?
John Paul II.
Why so?
Well, first of all, he was evangelizing with the fullness of faith, and I have great respect for Billy Graham, don't get me wrong. But obviously, as a Catholic evangelist, is going to be the one that's bringing the fullness of what Christ wants his church to have, so that makes him greater. But I think also just look at the extent of his ministry. John Paul II going to every corner of the world. I don't know anybody in the last century who reached more people, who was more publicly a symbol of the gospel than John Paul. Billy Graham would be second to him, I think.
All right, again, we're talking about what's our church's growth strategy. And so far, we've talked about 2 particular strategies. One was that every family that comes regularly to Mass should make a commitment to bring another family to Mass this coming year. Strategy 2 was to pray for the expansion of the church. Here's the third strategy you mentioned. Invite seekers to raise their questions. Talk about that.
Yeah, and you and I, Brandon, are very much on the same page here, because we both like apologetics and realize the importance of it. So if someone who's, let's say it's a child of yours, or it's a niece or nephew, it's a grandchild, it could be a parent, it's a co-worker, someone that's away from the faith, ask them why. And not obnoxiously, not wearing your religion on your sleeve, not in a proselytizing way, so all that, of course. But to ask them, I'm just kind of curious. I haven't seen your church for a long time. Or I know you were, raised a Catholic. How come you're not coming to Mass? Well, I think you'd be surprised that people are willing to tell you why. And, Brandon, you and I both know this, having watched this thing for a long time, the standard objections. How do you prove there's a God? Why is there so much suffering in the world? Why would you think your religion is right? Why are you so mean to gay people and transgender people? Just listen to young people especially, and you'll over and over and over again hear the same objections. Okay, ask them. Ask them. I think you'll be surprised that they're willing to tell you. But then the second part of it, which is very important, is make sure you've got something like an answer. So it's one thing to elicit the question, but then you say, "Oh, that's a good question. I don't really have an answer to that." Well, you won't be very effective. The good news is that since I think the rise of the new atheists in the early zeros, there's been an explosion of texts and tapes and videos and internet things in regard to Catholic evangelism and apologetics. There's been an explosion. It's like a renaissance in Catholic apologetics. So there are a lot of good books at high level, medium level, lower level. Fine, find the one that fits your interest or your purpose, and bone up on them. Learn the answers to some of the questions that people have. Engage them. I think you'd be surprised how effective that can be.
I'd be remiss here not to mention our own Word on Fire Institute, because if I'm not mistaken, this is partly why you created the Institute in the first place, which was to form an army of people capable of answering the questions that seekers are asking.
Yeah, and again, not to reduce it to apologetics, it's not reductive, but it's an essential part of it. Jesus walks with the two people on the road to Emmaus, and he finds out what's on their mind. What are you talking about as you go? And indeed, they're talking about him, but in a very confused way. That's the point, seems to me. He didn't say, "Oh yeah, you guys are doing great," and "Oh, I'm glad you're thinking about Jesus of Nazareth." No, after he listened to them, he then said, "How foolish you are, and don't you get it, and don't you understand, and let me explain this to you now." And so Jesus does, I would say, act as a very effective evangelizer and apologist, because now he opens up the scriptures, and that's when their hearts catch fire, right? When our hearts burning within us. They weren't burning within them when they were just articulating their questions. It's when they got some answers that their hearts began to burn within them. So it happens today with our religious seekers. Don't assume that someone not coming to church is hateful toward religion, or they're just antipathetic. They might be honest seekers, and there's a block. There's something that's preventing them from coming. And you could be the means by which God is bringing that person back, eliminating that obstacle.
So again, strategy number 1, bring another family to Mass this year. Strategy 2, pray for the expansion of the church. And strategy 3, invite seekers to raise their questions. Here's the 4th and final strategy you offered. Be kind. You said that even the most casual glance at the Catholic social media landscape reveals a plethora of obnoxious behavior. You say these attitudes are inimical to evangelization. Talk about that.
Just the other day, Brandon, I was watching Jordan Peterson had an interview with a Muslim scholar, and they were talking about religious issues and so on. And the Muslim scholar was appealing to what he called the inner logic of the Quran, that's what really gives credibility to it. And Peterson's response was, what I find most compelling is the effect that a religion has on its adherents. And I thought right away, what did Jesus say? It's by your love that people will know that you are my disciples. So, if you've taken in the whole of Catholic theology, you know the answer to every apologetic question, you've read every book, but you're not a person of love, well, then it hasn't worked for you. It hasn't changed you. It hasn't Christified you. And you will thereby be a very ineffective evangelizer. I've said this before, but I will happily say it again. If you're a religious seeker and you go on much of Catholic social media, and you start listening to people and start reading the comment boxes and following the fights that are going on, I don't think you're going to be evangelized at all. I think you're going to be disedified. I would be. And I think you're going to say these people are either crazy or cruel, and I want nothing to do with them. The way we're presenting ourselves, and I'll say this now maybe as a spiritual father to some people on the internet, the way we're presenting ourselves is anti-evangelical. We start fighting like cats and dogs. We're going to be disedifying anyone that's coming to listen. So that's social media. But now just do the one-on-one thing. If someone is approaching you or looking at you and say, "Oh, that person's Catholic, I'm kind of interested in religion," and then they see you as obnoxious, difficult, judgmental, fierce, violent, well, then they're going to be turned off. Go back to Sherry Waddell, who's what's it called? Intentional disciples.
Forming intentional disciples.
Forming intentional disciples, which I think is a kind of a modern classic in this field. But she said, step one is often just the establishment of trust. So before you can get through to someone about the Lord Jesus Christ, the first step is, well, do they trust you? Do you seem like a nice, happy, inviting sort of person? If not, they're not going to listen to you, even if you got the best arguments in the world, So maybe it sounds a little trite or superficial, but I don't think so. I think it's maybe the most important is be kind. Allow people to see that Jesus has indeed affected your life. Then they'll listen to you. And there is the famous now cliched line from Paul VI about, people will, they want witnesses more than teachers, and they'll listen to teachers in the measure that they're also witnesses. Well, I get it. I mean, that's what he's arguing, it seems to me.
Let's close with this question. I know a lot of the strategies here are applicable to Catholics of any stage of life, any state of life, I should say. But I'm curious if you had specific advice for priests. You're now a bishop overseeing a bunch of priests. What advice would you give them on how to participate in the growth of the church?
That's good, Brandon. I mean, beyond the four that we mentioned, maybe it's the liturgy. The priest is the chief liturgist in that parish, and he leads his people as he leads them in prayer. Maybe it's that. Maybe it's attentiveness to the liturgy, to make sure that that's a place where Christ is truly encountered. That will have a attractive power. So maybe I'd say that. I have to think about it more, but maybe that's my first reaction, is that the liturgy, the way the liturgy is enacted, will have an evangelical or anti-evangelical quality.
Well, it's time now for a question from one of our listeners. If you have one that you'd like to send Bishop Barron, send it in at the website askbishopbarron.com. Today we have a question from a woman all the way in Hawaii. She's asking why Catholics should be respectful of life. Here's her question.
My name is Ramana from Hawaii. Bishop, can you please explain why Catholics should be pro-life? Thank you.
I always love questions like that. I mean, it's a really basic question, but I always tell my students at Mundelein that the simplest questions are always the best ones, that they cut to the heart of things. Look at Aquinas will say the most fundamental ground of the moral life is simply this imperative: do good and avoid evil. Right? So, not easy, by the way, but it's simple to state: do good and avoid evil. That's the moral life. Now, under that category of the good, well, what are some of these goods? And Aquinas names a number of them. Sociability is one. Connection to God's another one. But one of them is existence, because things like to continue in existence. It's a basic impulse of reality. And then a second one is life. Things want to preserve life because they recognize life as a good. Being, life, sociability, religion are some of the basic goods. Now, some philosophers today have expanded those and given us other types of basic goods. But the point is, it's the kind of grammar or basic structure of the moral life. That once we understand these basic goods, we should pursue them, and we should stand against anything that is trying to undermine them, right? So what's an attack on existence, on life, on sociability, on religion, on art, for example? That we should oppose those things. We should do good and avoid evil. Well, life, human life specifically, is one of those fundamental goods. We should be for it. We should cultivate it, do all we can to enhance it, and we should stand athwart any attempt to undermine it. So we say, protecting the life of the innocent is one of the most basic commands of the moral life. If life is threatened, we should stand against that. So when we say pro-life, I would mean it in a very broad sense, but we usually mean to stand against the abortion regime in our country. And I'd say, yeah, dead right, because we want to do good and avoid evil. One of the fundamental goods is life, so we want to enhance it, and we want to stand against what's attacking life. So that's why Catholics should be pro-life.
Well, thanks, Romana, for the question. And another episode means another announcement of a Word on Fire book. And this one I'm very excited about because it's a new publication from our Word on Fire academic line. So this is a more serious book. It's written by one of the finest theologians in the Catholic Church today, Matthew Levering. And the book is titled Newman on Doctrinal Corruption. In this book, Levering argues that John Henry Newman's career is shaped in large part by concerns about doctrinal corruption. He's probably best known for his doctrinal development ideas, but Levering looks at the other side of that coin. This book focuses on Newman's views of corruption over the course of his life by looking at his engagements with 5 key figures: the historian Edward Gibbon, his friend Hurrell Froude, his brother Francis Newman, the prominent figure in the Oxford movement, Edward Pusey, and the church historian Ignaz von Dullinger. Did I get that German right? Bishop Dullinger? Dullinger.
Very good.
So if you're interested in the person of John Henry Newman and his theology, then I encourage you to check this book out. It's by Matthew Levering, and again, it's titled Newman on Doctrinal Corruption. You can find it at wordonfire.org/Newman. Well, thanks so much for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time on the Word on Fire show.